start off. We're going to read from John chapter 21 today. And again, it's just looking at some of the appearances of Jesus after Easter. So John chapter 21 and verse 1 to 14. So you can turn there if you have a Bible, or if you're going to follow along somewhere. John chapter 21 and 1 to 14. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them, and they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there, with fish on it, and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153, but even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Let's just pray again briefly. Lord, as we reflect on this, we ask that you would speak to each one of us. Lord, I pray that you'd be with me and give me the words to share. And Lord, I pray that just every single person, including myself, would be able to hear from you in a way that causes us to be shaped and moulded and to move forward as your people. So we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So this passage, the first word that we read is afterwards, and it comes just after Jesus had appeared to the disciples. He appeared to Thomas when Thomas had been saying, "Unless I see the marks in his hands, I put my finger where the nails were, I will not believe." And then Jesus then appeared with him and said, "Peace be with you," and allowed him to touch his hands. And then just before that, in this chapter 20, Jesus had appeared to the other disciples and said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." So peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. So given that that's what they've just been told and what's been spoken to them by Jesus, it's interesting that they find themselves together beside the Sea of Tiberias or Galilee, and Simon Peter says, "I'm going out to fish." And the others say, "We'll go with you." You could look at that a couple of ways. You could say, Jesus has said to them, "As the Father sent me, I'm sending you." And they decide, okay, that we're fishermen, so we'll go and get on with our job. God will be with us as we fish, and we'll fish in a way that's godly, and let everybody see that. And of course that is part of our calling in our workplaces and things that we end up doing on a day-to-day basis. We're to do things in such a way that people see God with us, or we hope that they can, and they see something in our character and the way we are. But I don't think that's what's going on here. I think that on this occasion, the disciples have all simply slipped back into default mode. It's like they've met with Jesus. He's appeared to them a few times. He's spoken into their lives. He's asked them and said to them, as the Father sent me, I'm sending you. He has tasks for them to do, things that he's calling them to do, to be. And he's trying to kind of get through to them, coming to them a number of times and explaining this. But still in this passage it says that they just decided to go out and fish. It's as if it's not quite clicking with them. And you get an indication that it's not really what they're meant to be doing at that point, because they're just kind of fruitless. They have nothing to show for it. They've kind of regressed into who they were even before Jesus called them. And I suppose there's part of that is encouraging to us, because it's amazing how many times God does things in our lives, or he speaks into our lives, or he calls us to be and do certain things, but we can somehow just slip back in to who we were before he spoke to us, or before we met him, or before we were saved. It's like we somehow slip back into our old life. And there's an encouragement that happens to even the apostles and the disciples here. They just don't quite get things, not quite grasp, and they go back to fishing. So there is encouragement, but there is also a challenge, isn't there? Because Jesus comes to them again and reorientates them and reminds them of what he's calling them to do. And it becomes a particularly important episode, this, for Peter. And if you were to read on, you'd see it's the point where Jesus really reinstates Peter and ministers to him. So they've slipped back into who they've been before. Jesus comes to minister them, and in the same way, it might be this morning that God wants to encourage, challenge you. Maybe he has called you to follow him, to live certain ways, or he's given you certain gifts to use, and somehow you've slipped away from following him each day, or somehow you're got to the point where you're just not actually using the gifts that he's given you in the way that you know you could, and you maybe slip back to your equivalent of fishing. And perhaps today God would call you to and come and say to you and draw you to himself and remind you of his mission for you and what he would call you to be. It's interesting that there's three of the disciples named in verse 2, Simon Peter, Thomas and Nathaniel. And each one of them actually in the Gospel of John stands out because they all make important confessions about Jesus, about who he is. Simon Peter had said in chapter 6 and 69, "You're the Holy One of God." Nathaniel had said at the beginning of the Gospel of John, "You're the Son of God, you're the King of Israel." And almost bookending that, at the other end of the Gospel, just before this passage, Thomas had said, "My Lord and my God." So they'd all made really important confessions of who God is and of faith. But interestingly, each one of them also falls and fails in different ways. Peter denied Jesus. Nathaniel kind of looked down upon someone from Nazareth, and he was like, oh, can anybody good come from Nazareth? So he was a bit proud in a sense. And Thomas had been like grasping after physical proof and doubting in a sense. So each one of them had these kind of failings. And again, it's just another encouragement for us that even though we may doubt or slip away or make mistakes, God still would come to us and draw us back to himself. And I think it's important that in this passage you also see that Jesus is very gracious and patient. So he's already spoken to them a number of times and appeared to them. And here they go out to fish. But he comes to them again. And he doesn't come and sort of speak to them harshly. He's not saying, oh, you've just not got it again, or you've slipped back into not following after me again. He almost comes along a bit like a parent comes along and interacts with a child, and he kind of almost goes along with their game in a sense, and comes and they don't quite realise who he is, and it's like, oh, have you not caught something? And then he says, well, why don't you try the nets on the other side? And then it's only as they kind of do that, and as he kind of graciously goes along with where they're at, that they start to realise that it's him. And they remember perhaps the first time some of them were called by Jesus, and he told them that he would make them fishers of men. And they may also have remembered another episode, which is in Luke 5, where they're out in the boat with Jesus and they haven't been successful, and they've been fishing all night and failed. And he said to them, why don't you cast your nets out into the deep water? And when they do, they pull in a huge catch of fish. So Jesus kind of gently reminds them of his original calling and nurses them back and says, look, I have a plan for you. It's interesting that this is also another miracle of nature. So just as Jesus has been resurrected and is alive, he is a nature miracle and shows, look, I have power over all this. Why are you forgetting that? And also just an interesting little thing to note is that they've put their nets out and have been fruitless and not managed to draw anything in, but as they listen to him and he says to them, cast them out again on the other side, which kind of seems a sort of silly, fickle thing to do. They do draw in a huge amount of fish, and it reminds you of John 15 and verse 5, where he says, well, apart from me, you can do nothing. So is Jesus coming to you today, again, afresh, and calling you to himself? Maybe he's coming with compassion for you and with grace for you, and he'll come alongside you and remind you of who he's called you to be, and he'll nurse you back and bring you into the plans that he has for you, because that is what he is like. It's interesting, I mentioned that the passage after this is where it really talks about Peter and Jesus, and how Jesus asks Peter 3 times, oh, do you love me? And Peter says, well, you know what, I love you. And he goes through a process of kind of reconciliation with Jesus, because he denied Jesus 3 times, and Jesus asked him these questions 3 times. And then he goes on to say 3 times, well, if you feed my sheep. So there's a reconciliation, and Jesus welcomes Peter back and then commissions him afresh. But in the passage that we've just read, it's also an important lead up to that. And you probably noticed that when they realised it was Jesus, Peter jumped out the boat and he either sort of swam or waded 100 yards to the shore. And there's just some sort of recklessness about them compared to the others, and the others all kind of drag the nets in. But we can kind of look to the the second part of it we didn't read is Peter's kind of reinstatement, but interestingly it starts here because Peter knows who Jesus is. He knows that he's loving and forgiving and that he's caring, and he realises it's Jesus at the shore and he jumps out after him. So even though there's still work to be done in Peter's life, there's still things that need to be worked through for him and healing that needs to happen, he is confident in Jesus and he jumps out of the boat and he goes running to him. Maybe today you could learn from Peter's example. Maybe there's some reconciliation needed between you and Jesus, and you need to talk to him and to put some things right in your life. But Peter's example here shows us that those who know Jesus know that he will be gracious and compassionate, as we sang earlier, and that as we run to him and turn to him, he will accept us and he will welcome us to himself and he will restore us. And so if you're going through that process, I'll just encourage you, look to the example of Peter. Don't be scared to run to Jesus. Don't think that he won't accept you. Trust him. This bit also reminds me a little bit of, I've been reading through Samuel in kind of my own quiet time, and it reminds me a bit of David when he's dancing in front of the ark, and the ark's being returned to Jerusalem, and he kind of goes dancing around, and his wife Michal is watching, and she despises him actually, and she says, to herself, he's so undignified. How could he act like that? And I wonder if the other disciples, as they were being responsible, and they knew that Jesus had told them to cast the net on the other side, and they had this big catch of fish, and they thought, let's drag it into shore. And then perhaps as Peter just jumped out the boat and left them all to it, and was being a bit reckless, maybe they might have been tempted to despise him even a little bit. I think, well, he shouldn't really be acting like that. He could have helped us. He could have helped drag the fish in. Instead he goes jumping into the water out to Jesus and leaves them all behind. And in church we have to be careful when people are going through a process of coming back to God, or even of becoming Christians, and they might do things or act in ways that we don't think is quite right. Maybe we think, they should be helping pull the net, but they go jumping out extravagant, or they dance around a bit like David, or there's certain things that they're working through, and so there's certain behaviours that have not quite stopped yet. And the danger is that we could become a bit like David's wife Michal, looking at David and judge him, or judge these people. So in church we've got to be careful that we don't judge those who are going through a process, and they maybe reach out to God in a kind of reckless abandon, or a way that we don't quite like the look of, as God takes them through a process of restoring them and healing them. Another aspect of this story that I thought was really important to note is that Jesus is kind of supernaturally natural, or naturally supernatural, whichever way you want to look at it. This is the resurrected Jesus, and he appears to them, comes into their midst, and speaks to them from the shore. But then, before he pretty much does anything, he prepares something for them. And Liam sort of mentioned earlier, it's basically a barbecue, and he cooks them breakfast. So this is the resurrected Christ, but he just serves them by making them breakfast and having a barbecue together. And it's just such a natural thing for people to do together. And it probably reminds us as well, just the importance of the kind of natural things. Maybe when we're trying to draw close to God, there's a danger that we can become super spiritual. We can neglect almost the really simple things. Eating together, serving one another, even just having a barbecue together, spending time with one another. Jesus goes out his way to cook from a barbecue and serve them on the shore as they come in. Excuse me. That cough sounds terrible when it gets the extra depth from the plate. It's not as bad as it sounds. Anyway. There's something important about the barbecue as well, though, which is that the charcoal fire, which is the words used, is the same words that are used of the place where Peter first denies Jesus, because as Jesus is being arrested, he's standing beside a fire, a charcoal fire, warming himself. So just before he denies Jesus the 3 times, he's kind of beside the fire. And once again, Peter finds himself beside a charcoal fire. So Jesus is going out of his way to provide and to prepare for Peter in such a way that Peter can be comforted and restored. And maybe as Peter was standing by the fire, he remembered what he'd done. But then Jesus goes on to kind of nurse him back to wholeness. And then finally, Jesus asks the disciples to join him and contribute. So he asks them to go now and drag the fish in. But he already has fish on the fire. So he's cooking for them. He's already provided for them. But then he still asks them to bring some more. So he says, I'll bring some of your fish to the fire and cook together. So Jesus has already provided everything, but then he still asks them to join him with that. And it's the same for us in our Christian life. Jesus provides everything that we need, but he still calls us to join with him. And of course, this whole episode is like deeply symbolic as well, because, as I mentioned earlier, Jesus has told them, I'm going to make you fishers of men. And he's come and asked them to cast out the net, and it was so full of fish, 153. It was hard for them to drag it to the shore. And whatever the reason for the 153, if you read commentaries, there's all different suggestions given. There was one kind of Latin poet who talked about how there's 153 types of fish. So it might well be that this symbolised all types of potential fish, symbolising all peoples of the whole world God wants us to reach. Some people add up all sorts of numbers, but they come up with different reasons for why there's 153, but the main point is that it represents fullness. The nets were full of large fish, and so this whole episode symbolises how God is calling us to join him in reaching out to people and drawing them to himself. And in verse 11 it says, Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. And the word that's used for dragged in Greek is the same word that's used when Jesus says in chapter 12 of John 32, when I'm lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. So it's that same verb that's used. So it's deeply kind of symbolic, this whole episode. And there's meaning behind even the simplest of actions that happen as Jesus interacts with people. God calls us to join him in reaching out to others and inviting them to himself. We have a role to play in doing that. But interestingly, it's him that's doing it all along. It's him that's drawing people to himself. So in a sense, when you look to share your faith with others, really what you're doing is looking to see where God is already at work. And you'll probably see signs of that in the way that what's going on in people's lives, the things you end up talking to you about. because God wants to draw all people to himself. I'm going to just draw it to a close there. But I hope there's been some encouragement or challenge to you today. Maybe God's calling you to remember what He's spoken into your life. Remember His call to you to be a disciple. Remember the gifts that He's put in your life that you can use. Maybe you need to remember that He is gracious and patient, and even if you've let Him down, He will welcome you back and draw you to Himself. Maybe you need to take Peter's example and trust that as you reach out to Jesus and run to Him, that He welcomes you. Because those who know Jesus know that He is kind, and a bruised reed He will not break, is a verse from Isaiah. Maybe you need to remember that Jesus, although He is the fount of everything and of all that is real, is still the most natural of people. And He goes out His way just simply to have a barbecue with people. It just shows us the sheer importance of things that seem almost like so simple. Just eating with someone, spending time with them. But it is interesting, of course, that as He hands out the bread and the fish, the disciples may have remembered the miracles of provision of vast crowds of bread and fish. And as we come to share communion together, it also says in verse 13, Jesus took the bread and gave it to them. And the kind of words that are used almost echo the words that are used of communion, of the breaking of bread and handing it out to others. Jesus is supernaturally natural. And He also calls us to join Him and to reach out to others and to be part of seeing where He is at work in others' lives and then pointing them to Himself, to Jesus. Shall we pray together? Lord, we thank You that You deeply love each person here. And Lord, You have plans for us to be Your disciples and to share life with others, to share who You are with others in our words and in our deeds. And each person here You long to use to do all sorts of amazing and special things. Lord, we're sorry when we forget that. I guess that's just part of what it is to be a human. And Lord, we see that even the apostles did the similar things and slipped back into their old ways. So Lord, this morning we just want to refocus. Lord, would You help us to come afresh to You? Would You help us to chase after You, to run after You? Lord, would You help us to respond to You? And to just be ready to share in pointing other people to You. So Lord, I pray for each person here that You bless them this morning with a renewed sense of focus. And Lord, help each one of us to remember what You're calling us to be, to do. And Lord, help us to realise how to do and put that into practice each day of our life. So Lord, we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. I wonder if someone could get people back through